Okay, hello again, everybody. Okay, so the next one, which is yet another donation from Tobias. I'm going to put his picture up because if you've not seen any of the others, you're not going to know what he looks like. Okay, so this is interesting for not only where it's made, but for the type of whiskey that it is, because it's actually very reminiscent of a near legendary whiskey that is essentially love it or hate it within the whiskey community. So there was in 1996 and 1997, the Mannock Distillery released a whiskey that was called Loch Dhu, which is Scots Gaelic for Black Lake. And the reason it was called that was because it was being marketed as a black whiskey. And I will put a bottle up. I haven't got one. I will put a picture of the bottle of Loch Dhu up. And the way that they'd made it so dark was they did two things. They matured it in casks that had been really, really heavily charred, like, bonfire inside the cask, set a flamethrower on it, do everything you can to essentially turn that cask into a charcoal briquette. And then they added loads and loads of black caramel colouring as well to make it as dark as possible. I don't think it was a particularly old whiskey either. I don't think it had spent that long in the cask. It wasn't like aged for donkey's years, but it was, it wasn't particularly old. It was more they were trying to do whatever they could to make it as dark as possible. And it's nowadays, because they made it for about 2 years and then stopped producing it, and it's become a collector's item for people that are either intrigued to know how it tastes, or for people that have tried it and either want to get hold of another bottle because they thought it was brilliant, or have tried it and think it's one of the worst whiskies ever made, and they want to get hold of it so that they can throw it in a skip by the sound of it. So this one that I got from Tobias is a version of Loch Dhu, essentially. It's actually a Japanese whiskey. It's called Scarecrow, and here's a picture of the bottle now. Now, this is from a distillery that was in Hanyu, in Japan, obviously, because it's Japanese whiskey. And here is a map of where Hanyu is in relation to Tokyo. It's just kind of north and very slightly northwest, northwest, I think they call it, from Tokyo. And it was a family called it was the Akuto family that got their license to produce alcohol in 1946, but in the 1980s then started distilling whiskey. And it was a gentleman called Isuji Akuto. They were producing whiskey, and then in 2000 they stopped producing, and then in 2004 the distillery closed down. Now Isuji's grandson Ichiro actually bought all the remaining stocks and was releasing them under essentially his own label. There was a malt card range, and they were very, very popular indeed. And this is actually one of sort of his releases, where they've taken one of their 10-year-old whiskies. As with Loch Dhu, and this says it on the label. If you Google search the bottle itself, and interestingly, this is actually available on Hard to Find Whiskies, which is a company based down at Birmingham. Joe Ellis, who's the guy that does those fantastic Whiskey Wednesday videos, he's one of the managers there. They actually have this for sale on their website at £559 for a bottle. So for me to get that off Tobias is simply incredible. But anyway, yes, this is one of the releases, and it says it on the label. It actually says on the front label that it has been matured in heavily charred casks and black caramel added to get a dark colouring, which is very interesting that they've even admitted to doing that. They're basically saying, look, we're trying to make this as dark as possible, this is how we're doing it, and if that's what you want, fantastic, happy days. So it's 40%, it's a 10-year-old whiskey that's then been put into these, I shouldn't be doing that, I've got to use my chicken first, put into these heavily charred casks, and then caramel has been pretty liberally added to darken it up. Jesus, would you look at that colour. I mean, that, I don't know how much of that you can pick up, but that to me looks like a stout. That's how dark it is. So yeah, Ichiro opened Chichibu Distillery in 2008, which I understand is still going. I don't think he's done anything like this with any of the stock there. I'm a little bit afraid, I'll be honest, but we'll see. This is going to be interesting stuff. I mean, this is just ridiculous colour. And straight away it's treacle. It's like pure treacle. It's intense, it's very rich, it's not as powerful as I thought it was going to be. It's intense, but it's not ridiculously sweet, but it is very treacly. But there is a decent fruitiness to it. It's a concentration of fruitcake. It's not as fruity as I thought it was going to be. It's quite fiery and it's really quite woody. And it's actually, I've never had Loch Do, but if people would come into the whiskey shop and ask about it, I knew enough about Loch Do to kind of explain about how they'd made it and what they'd done with it. And my impression of Loch Do was because they'd heavily charred the casks that much, that essentially the whiskey was floating around with bits of charcoal in it and ash and all this lot. And it's kind of, this is how I imagine that would taste, because it tastes like there is bits of charcoal that have been in it or kind of mixed in with it, because there is a definite, not ashy, but that, you know, when you have a barbecue and you have the sausage that falls into the coals and you pick it out and you eat it anyway because it's a sausage and it's barbecue and it's awesome, and there is that kind of charcoaly flavour to it. Yeah, it's definitely there. It's not as intensely fruity as I thought it was going to be, and it's not as artificially sweet as I thought it might be with them adding so much caramel in. Surprisingly, there's not really that much to it. It is a little bit, it's smoky, but it's like a cigarette smoke. Yeah, it's like a cigarette-y type smoke rather than the bonfire smoke that you tend to get with Islays. It's not a particularly great smokiness to it. If you were a smoker, you'd probably dig that. I'm not, and it's not a particularly nice feeling inside my mouth. But it's not as intense, it's not as full on, it's much more gentle than I thought it was going to be considering the colour. I was expecting either a totally artificial sweetness that was just going to overpower everything, or somehow some kind of really rich, really intense dark fruitiness. And there's neither. There is this smokiness that's more of a cigarette smokiness than a pleasant bonfire, say from Islays or anything like that. There is a sweetness, but it's very low. There's not a great deal there. There's bugger all on the finish. There really is nothing at all. It's interesting, but to be honest, the colour is more interesting than the rest of the whiskey. It's weird. Yeah, there's really not much to it. Not much to it at all. Apart from this lingering leftover feel of sort of ashiness. It's not quite as bad as licking an ashtray, but it's that kind of element. Unusual. Amazing to say that I've tried it. I mean, I think that's worth about 20 quid, that shot I've just had. I wouldn't go back for it. I certainly wouldn't hunt. I wouldn't pay 560 quid for it, but I wouldn't hunt out a bottle. And if Loch Do is anything like that, I could take or leave Loch Do anyway. But fascinating to have. I've got two more of Tobias's to go. Interesting, very, very interesting indeed. Right, that'll do me for tonight. I will see you in the next one. Cheers.